You're listening to Conversations Along the Way, part of the Stoic Mom Project. At the SMP, we embrace the Stoic principle of the obstacle is the way, whether we can take the hardest things in our lives and use them as a way to learn and grow into the best versions of ourselves. If you're here, there's a good chance you're what I like to call a growth-oriented, non-affirming parent of a trans-identified young person. I'm Stoic Mom, a life coach who is also a growth-oriented, non-affirming parent of an adult trans-identified daughter. I've committed to having guests on this podcast who bring messages of healing. I invite professionals who I believe have expertise that can help you regain solid ground and reframe this circumstance in a way that supports you to learn and grow from it. I also invite other parents who found healthy ways to navigate this destabilizing circumstance, whose stories and strategies may inspire you. Today's guest is one of these parents. I hope you find value in healing ideas from our conversation. Well, if it's all right with you, I'd like to start with how we connected. Does that work?
Yeah, I can't remember exactly how I found my way to you, but I found my way. It might have been through Pitt or through Jen Speck, connecting to Stoic Mom letters. I don't even remember what you call it. Your
The
Stoic
Stoic Mom
Mom.
Project. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I got those for quite some time. And as I would read them, I would be like, she's speaking my language. Like somebody else sees things the way I see them, is experiencing this the way I am. And it just really resonated. And so then when you offered that connection to the community, I was like, you know, I could use that kind of support as well. And I could offer support in there because of all the work I've been doing. Um, in this whole realm of trans ID kids, there's all sorts of different scenes. There's like the scene of
Mm-hmm.
where people are like politically active and want to make change. And I think that's valuable, but it's not where I belong. It's not my calling or um, how I can show up. And then the raging and the upsetness and all of that, there's a need and a space for people to be able to just unfiltered
Mm-hmm.
share where they're at.
Mm-hmm.
And living there is not a very healthy place for me either. Like that's so finding a place where people are doing this kind of finding stability in a very unstable world, in an
Mm-hmm.
uncertain situation, and finding other people who are accessing tools and resourcing themselves, like that was super appealing to me. And so I was really grateful to kind of find um, some of that sanity and some of that grounding in your letter, which led
Mm-hmm.
me to your community.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of want to, when you say someone speaking my language or experiencing this in a similar way, can you say more about that? Like, what is that way?
Yeah. I think kind of like thinking back on some of your letters, there was a lot of the like um, focus on me as a mom and my own experience and what I can control,
Mm-hmm.
and not spending all our time hanging out with the things we can't control, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's crazy making. That's like,
Mm-hmm.
and we've all been there.
Mm-hmm.
I spend time there regularly. And I'm like, oh, there we go again. Like, come back to yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, does that answer your question on
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think
that?
so. And yeah, I'd love to come back to the community later on in the conversation.
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, Something that stood out when in your application, and you and I talked before hitting
Yeah,
record that it's okay
yeah,
for me to reference this.
yeah.
Um,
was that you had been through an experience with your older child. So you have a trans-identified daughter,
Hmm.
right? Who is she junior, senior?
Yeah, she's a junior. Yeah.
She's a
Hmm.
junior. Okay. Um, uh, and like the rest of us, it was shocking, right? It
Hmm.
definitely it did a number on you, but because of your experience with her older brother, you were
Hmm.
maybe already a little more resourced. Is that accurate? And do you mind
Yeah,
kind of saying
yeah,
about that?
absolutely.
Okay.
It totally is. And so often I think about the situation that we went through with our son and mental illness in the teen years. And like I did all the mom things of like trying to like fix my child. My
Mm,
child's broken, he needs fixing. You know, all the alarm bells are going off inside, the mama bear fighters coming out. And, you know, I went and got the therapist and I read up on the mental illness he was struggling with. And um, what I noticed over time was that the more I tried to help and was reacting to him and becoming really anxious about his well-being and
hmm
fearful,
hmm
the more he felt incapable, scared, reactive, pushed me away. And I noticed that. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute here. Um, this isn't helpful. And, you know, like, let's say Einstein says, I think it was Einstein, is like the definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing and expect a different result. You
hmm
know, and it done. So I went and started to get some help for myself, some therapy, and just to calm my system down, figure out how can I engage with him in a way that's not harmful, right?
Before
Yeah,
you go there, yeah, I'm sorry. I want to just because
yeah.
you said something so important, I think, that is
Mm,
can be really challenging for moms to wrap their head around. And that is your state, that
mhm,
anxiety that you were feeling
mhm.
and your drive to fix him,
Yeah,
what that communicated to him.
yeah,
And then, of
yeah,
course, how he behaved as a
yeah,
result of that communication, right? So,
yeah, yeah. So I'm
can we spend a
sorry.
little bit of time there before we move on to,
Yes.
kind of,
Okay, yeah, coming back to that, it was so profound. And so, like, I had to face myself. And I think that
mm,
that's always a good place to go, right? Like, I his situation was around OCD and contamination OCD. And I was the contaminant, which meant he couldn't be around me. His brain told him, this isn't okay. I'm not okay here. And eventually at 16, he moved across the country. Um, and, you know, things got better. But in our time apart, I had to look at like, well, what is it about being a mom? Like, what's a successful mom? What are my expectations of him?
mhm,
What are my expectations of myself? Because like there's that common like thing, and I hear our trans moms community saying like, I don't deserve this. My kids should be because I gave to them for 15,
mhm,
20 years, right? They owe me. And I'm like, I'm a questioner. So I'm like,
mhm,
does my son really owe me? Like, why did I have him? Was it so he would treat me well with respect and everything else, or so that this new being that I brought into the world would have a chance to discover their own path and add their own value to the world? And I had to be honest and say there was a part of me that wanted to be respected, but it didn't feel good to say, you owe me, right? And when I
mhm.
think about even with my own parents, I'm like, do I want my parents to say that I owe them something? you know?
Mhm. Mhm.
I want to be able to freely give them my respect and love, right?
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
did not, it didn't feel good in my body and in my system to think my son owes me his love and respect, right? Like,
Mhm. Mhm.
so that was kind of part of it. And then realizing that, like, when I'm in fear, so this is a separate little piece, when I'm in fear and I'm reactive and I'm like, oh my gosh, and we need to get you therapy and you're doing this again, like hyper focusing on the little things that are the signs of the illness, right? And we can do that with our trans kids, trans ID'd kids too, right? We can be
Mhm.
like, oh, she's wearing like a sweatshirt again, you know? She cut her hair again, like, oh, this is not good, right? And when we hyper
Mhm.
focus on those little things, then it's like they feel threatened, attacked, not trusted. And what I noticed with my son was that when I didn't trust him, he didn't trust himself. And I
You
was
know,
like, yeah,
the
yeah.
Taoist quote, if you don't
Mhm.
trust the people, you make them untrustworthy.
Yeah. And I get like shivers as you're saying that. And I was like, that was a very pivotal moment with me with my son,
Mhm.
because I'm like, okay, when I'm not trusting him and I'm saying, you're not showing up and I'm scared for you, what I'm seeing in his face is like, I'm not capable. My mom doesn't even believe I'm capable.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Bingo. Yes.
And so I was like, oh, okay, can I show up to him in a way that says, I believe you're capable before you show me any evidence thereof. Right. And
Mhm.
so that was kind of like a little mind work for myself of like, okay, can I trust the universe and believe until there's evidence? Right. And so
Mhm.
I'd be like, okay, no, I know you've got this. Here's what you need to do for school or whatever. And like, I'd walk away. I'd be like, but I would see
Mhm.
him start to show up because,
Mhm.
our kids, whether they like are fighting us and contentious with us or not, like they look to us as mirrors of their own sense of self,
Mhm.
right? I mean, we are the most important people to them, whether it looks like it or not, and they're going off in social circles and things. But what I saw with my son, and I'm learning again, practicing with my daughter, is like how I show up and see them. They read that energy. Energy
Yes.
doesn't lie.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so just like really paying attention to my own nervous system regulation, my own
Mhm.
beliefs and thoughts. And
Mhm.
when I'm obsessing about like the what ifs and the, little bits and, trying to create a story out of what I'm seeing in this one moment,
Mhm.
then I'm like, ooh, that's like that slippery slope down to, I mean, I don't know, like with my son that I had to get to a point at some points in his illness where I was like, okay, he could wind up homeless, he could wind up dead, he
Mhm.
could wind up on drugs, other things could happen. Can I be okay with that and love him through it all?
Mhm.
Because I can't
Mhm.
control it. And
Mhm.
I have to be I'm really grateful. My kids are so sensitive, so empathic, so deeply loving. And yet they've got such a strong core sense of their own sovereignty. Like, you're not going
Mhm.
to tell me what to do, mom.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
So they've fought back. Whereas as a kid, maybe I was the people pleaser. I wanted to make my parents happy. I would do anything to make my parents happy. And part of that freaked me out that my kids wouldn't do that for me. But I'm grateful
Yeah. Yeah. Say more. Why does that make you grateful?
because if my kids changed their own path and their own journey and just kowtowed or like subverted their sense of self to please me,
Mhm.
then outwardly it would look good. But inside the relationship would be broken.
Mm.
and their own sense of going out into the world. I mean, we all know, like those of us who maybe have some of that, overachieving, people pleasing tendencies, that like we betray ourselves because we
Mm.
want approval of others. And I'm
Mhm.
grateful that my kids, in their own ways, which are not necessarily healthy ways, are like, I'm not gonna betray my sense of self for you,
Mhm.
but I still love you and we can still meet and connect. So they've been
Mhm.
good teachers. Also, if my son, in this first go around of teen parenting had just been easier and not pushed back on me so hard, I never would have had to look under the hood of me, right? And be like,
Mhm.
oh, I'm not liking what I'm seeing here, right?
Mhm.
Controlling and not trusting and, you know,
Mhm.
all those other things. And it's not like, my husband and therapists would tell me, like, oh, stop blaming yourself. It's not your fault. I'm like, there's a difference between blaming yourself and
Yes.
noticing your part in things, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, there's an empowerment in seeing your part because that's what you have control over, right?
It's also um like I'm discovering, and I feel like this has been an amazing discovery in this experience, that this is also developmental on our part as midlife work, right? And
Mhm.
it is usually is going to come to us in relationship form, where something is going to get under our skin, right? It's
Mhm.
going to
Mhm.
force us to look under the hood. And if we
Mhm.
don't look under the hood,
Mhm.
there are some potentially really unpleasant consequences to that.
Oh,
We
yeah.
stop growing. If we
Yes.
make this all about what's happening out there and what's happening with our kids, and
Mhm.
not take this
Mhm.
opportunity to do what you said and look under the hood,
Mhm. Mhm.
we're stuck.
Yeah, yeah. And if we're blaming others or shaming
Mhm.
others or saying the problem's out here,
Mhm.
the locus of control is out there. We
That's
can't
right.
fix it, right? We
Yep.
can't make it
Yes.
better. And
Hmm.
also there's that idea of I don't know who to attribute this to, but we can become bitter or we can become better, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to become bitter and upset at and blame my kids for being who
Hmm.
they were, for struggling for what they're struggling through.
Hmm.
I am like, who do I want to be in this relationship? I
Yes.
mean, we still have struggles, but with both kids, challenges, right? But I
Hmm.
get to see how I show up.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And one thing that, I'm not a very mathy person, but when I look at like a relationship is made of person A and person B and how they interact together makes C the outcome, whatever that is,
Hmm.
a
Hmm.
close relationship, whatever. And if I'm A and my child's B, and I don't want the outcome I currently have, and I can't
Hmm.
control B, then the only
Hmm.
variable that could change the outcome is me.
Yes.
Right. And I'm
Yep.
like, oh, cool.
Hmm.
All right. Now I get to, get curious and explore. And
Mm.
yeah.
Well, and then did you experience a difference? And I guess I don't know all the details here about how long your son was
Yeah.
away, but you're saying he responded though to that shift,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
That when
Mhm.
you conveyed that trust in him,
Yeah.
and acted as if you could trust him,
Yeah.
you got a very different response from him than when you were
Yeah.
trying to fix him. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And that happened multiple times. So we had, you know, all the things and the separation and then coming back and me having this new way of being and seeing. And I remember him texting his dad and saying, I don't like having this separation with mom, but like that's what his brain was working with. And I went to him and I was like, I know you love me and I know you don't want it this way. And I want you to know I love you and it's okay how it is. And he just like broke down because that's what he needed to hear. Our kids, I don't believe that they want conflict with us or want, you know, to upset or worry us, really. They want to know that we're going to love them no matter what. And that no matter what doesn't mean that we're like on board with whatever they're doing, right?
Thank you for clarifying that. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And so, I mean, and one thing that really helped me with my son, and as I shift over to now, I've got this other child going through this completely different thing, is that OCD is very much around irrational thoughts and trying to control things, right? And it doesn't make sense. It's not logical. And there are, you know, you can't argue logically with an illogical emotional response. But you can invite the awareness of how suggestible we are, and that thoughts are not facts, feelings are not facts, right? That they can change, right, moment to moment, and to really recognize that just because I think it's true doesn't mean it is. And we learned that with my son. We learned about that cognitive distortion, black and white thinking, all or nothing thinking, all these different ways that our brain can play games with us. And so when things showed up with my daughter, we were like, oh, we know what this is. This is a brain that's made up some stories and got these other things going on. And the brains do it for a reason, and that it's work to kind of change it, and we can't change it all. You know, because that's inside of them. But we can love them through it, and also point out that the evidence doesn't line up with the thought. So for example, an example from my son, and the thing is that I love that I love about my experience. The thing I'm grateful for about these challenging experiences with these two amazing kids is that with my firstborn, it was, you know, a lot about me. And so it really caused me to have to look at things, right? But we learned about the way we think and how we can be hijacked in our brain, and it can totally derail us from functioning in the world if we listen to it. And the more power we give it, the bigger those thoughts become and take over our lives, right? And we saw that in all the different forms of therapy with him and such. So there was an example of a time where we went out to dinner, he and I, and he was in an intensive outpatient thing, and he was tucking his watch in and hiding it because he was afraid somebody was going to come by and steal it. We were in PF Chang's. And there were only two other families in there. And so, but his brain was really focused on the fear, because our brains can choose to obsess about things and then make up stories. So what I did with him, we called out, like, this is the thought. And then where's the evidence? Look around and show me what you actually see here. And it's kind of going up against what the brain is saying, right? And so understanding that our trans-identified kids have similar things going on, where their brain's telling them one thing, their biological reality is something very different, you know. And so, you know, I share that just it's a little picture of, did I convince him that, you know, he was safe? No, but I reminded him to look for evidence, that we can't always trust our brains, and that we need to look for evidence to support, you know. So anyway, it's a little aside, you know.
I'm excited to share that this episode of Conversations Along the Way is sponsored by Dream School, which is brought to you by the same three psychoanalysts who bring you the podcast This Jungian Life. For those who may not know, Lisa Marciano, author of the book Motherhood and one of the founders of Therapy First, is one of the co-hosts of This Jungian Life. Those who've been following the Stoic Mom Project since its early days in 2022 know that this Jungian Life podcast inspired me to start paying attention to the symbolism and meaning in my dreams. As a result, around my daughter's 18th birthday, I had a series of dreams that brought me much comfort and peace around trusting both her journey and the foundation we had provided her. I've since continued to spend time pondering my dreams and researching the symbols that appear, and basically, I was just hoping that I was, air quotes, doing it right. I finally gave myself the gift of dream school last fall and can already say it's inspired huge transformation in my life. It quickly deepened my appreciation for the wisdom my dreams offer me and increased my drive to learn more about Jungian philosophy and how I can use it to strengthen my coaching skill set. So not only do you learn how to, as they say, decode the language of metaphor and symbol and harness the power of your unconscious wisdom, if you engage fully in dream school, you'll learn quite a bit about Jung's ideas around human development over the lifespan, including his concept of individuation, a process that we're all invited to do in midlife that, adds more life to the rest of our lives. I could go on and on about the value of consciously engaging in our own midlife individuation process, but I'll save that for my posts on the Stoic Mom Project, and of course, my work in helping clients navigate their own unique individuation journey. If you're interested in Dream School and what it might inspire in you, you can use the code STOICMOM15 at checkout for 15% off of Dream School tuition. That's Stoic Mom in all caps, followed by the digits 15. Now, back to the conversation.
Well, yeah, I'm curious if have you attempted a similar approach with your daughter?
Yeah, so some of the ways that I've worked with my daughter is a little different. First, we really did want to hear from her, like what you're feeling is true. And then we really love this magician. There's another word, an illusionist named Darren Brown from the UK. And he does these YouTube videos, or maybe it's on Netflix, where he shows you really just how suggestible we are. Like, for example, there was one episode where they, over a long weekend, they convinced a really nice young man that he had committed a murder and to turn himself in. And he did, because it played with his memory and everything else. And then they worked with him and, showed him how they did that. And in the shows, people sign up to do that, right? I want to be on Darren's show. So he wasn't tricked out of the blue. But it really showed, if you have the right setting and they move things around and change things and cause you to doubt yourself, and then put these other things in, that you can believe things about yourself that are completely not true. And so we watched those shows with her because we're like, we want you to understand, as human beings, we are suggestible in all sorts of ways. And when we're just listening to YouTube while we're scribbling around, our brain is in that state where we're just believing whatever is coming in. And because it doesn't filter truth from fiction.
Connect it to her claims about her identity, or was this more of just
So this was kind of when it first became apparent that this was going on, or that she had this belief. So we're laying the foundation, and we've kind of shared some of the things her brother went through with her, because there's a 6-year gap, to help her understand. And what I really appreciated, we had an appointment with Sasha Aid of GenSpec, and shared with her what we were doing, this and somatic work, which I can talk about also, that's making a huge difference for her. But she said, the way we're approaching it and the things we're giving her, the tools we're giving her, are really important tools to understand the mind, understand, we can't always trust it, and, to look for evidence, all those things. And at the time, I think it was 2 years ago, she was 15, 14, 15.
Mhm.
And Sasha said, it's going to take a while because her brain is not fully developed enough to actually use the tools that you're giving her.
Mhm. Mhm.
But when that time comes, she will have this foundation of these tools and ways of understanding that she'll
Mhm.
be able to reflect on and use.
Mhm.
Um,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
So,
But she was
yeah,
open to
she was open
watching
to it.
these and
Oh, yeah.
okay. Mhm.
Yeah. So we
Okay.
watched them. We didn't preface it with this is, let me think, because this was a while ago. We, I don't think we prefaced it and said, we're going to convince you that you're really a girl. We're
Mhm.
going to watch these shows, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
We did say we really want you to be aware of the way our brains work and
Mhm.
how suggestible we are, because not everything we believe to be true is true.
Mhm.
And we want you to see in story form, in evidence form, in entertainment form,
Mhm.
how much we can be off the mark of what's real
Mhm.
because of
Mhm.
being manipulated by media or just taking in suggestions from others.
Yeah, and it seems like a great suggestion and some great content, if the child is open to looking at it.
Mhm.
I hesitate a little bit. I don't want to go too far down a rabbit hole of like things you're
Ah,
necessarily doing with her,
yeah, yeah.
because I do want to focus on mom's experience.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm.
and I do want to kind of say this for the listeners is that, clearly she was open to it and that
Yeah,
we have to be careful with this stuff. Sometimes we can just cause them to dig in more if
right.
they are not open to the experience, and able
Yeah.
to process what you're sharing with them.
Mhm,
And you could, it could still be content that you share, but maybe without any connection to the identity,
mhm.
just a way to
Yeah,
plant that
yeah,
seed that,
exactly,
you're
exactly. Yeah.
we are very suggestible, we
Mhm,
can't always
mhm.
trust what our brain is telling us, look for evidence.
Yeah, yeah.
So
And
just,
again, it's that difference between trying to fix
yeah,
and versus trying to resource.
yes, yes.
Right?
That I love that you say that word. Let's talk about what that means. What does it mean
Mhm,
to be
mhm.
resourced or to resource yourself? Help the listeners understand that and how that's been helpful.
Yes. So for me, I think it was helpful. Like, I didn't know, and I'm sure many listeners can relate to, like, I don't know why I just lose my shit and start screaming. Like, I'm a mom, I should be able to control myself,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? What is going on? And then we beat ourselves up. We're like, oh
Mm-hmm.
my gosh, like I thought I was a good mom. What is
Mm-hmm.
going on? And that really led me down some healthy rabbit holes
Okay.
of like nervous system, like understanding my nervous system and
Mm-hmm.
how we engage with the world and getting like therapeutic support, somatic experiencing, kind of understanding our fight flight reactivity. And
Mm-hmm.
then how do we get out of that? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Because honestly, and I went to the very like with my son. So this was years ago, and I'm like, I am freaking out on this child. It's not helping. I know it's not good. I'm not in control when this is happening. And I wasn't like
Mm-hmm.
being, throwing things or anything like that. But it was kind of, how we can get if we're really
Mm-hmm.
truly honest when we're really upset and worried and freaking out. I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one.
I'm pretty sure
I
too.
went to the therapist person, a gal who did these beautiful guided visualizations and had been through a lot of trauma and
Mhm.
healed. And I went to her and I said, I want help with one thing. I want to stop freaking out on my child. And I
Mhm.
don't know how because I am not in control when it happens. And that
Mhm.
was my starting point. right? Like, I don't know why this is happening. Is it generational things? There's probably parts of that, right? But resourcing is having an understanding of how to work with our own system and understand what's going on enough and have tools to help us stay present, get grounded, come back to ourselves. Because when we go into fight, flight, freak out mode, I would call it, right? We're like that lion that's like gonna go like just try to protect ourselves, or and we're not really, we've been hijacked by our limbic system to survive, right? And it's not a great feeling to not be in control of yourself, right? And we think sometimes that we are, like I'm just, doing the right thing, or I'm just gonna, protect my child. And but when it comes out of that fear mode, we don't have the front of our brain turned on. We don't have access to all of our inner wisdom. And we can be like that bull in the china shop that just does more damage than help, even though we're trying to help, right? And so resourcing for me is whatever tools, knowledge, community is going to help me come home to myself, regulate my nervous system so it's not dysregulated. There's some really great videos, and I've shared some of them with my kids about co-regulation, right? Because how my nervous system impacts the other person, right? A beautiful thing in the one little video I shared with both my kids was that she said, if you put two harps in opposite sides of a big hall and you pluck the C string on one, the C string on the other will start vibrating.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And they're like, guess what? You're the harp. Right. And that just drove home to me. And so I shared this little video with my kids about, nervous system dysregulation. And both of them said to me, oh, that's why we're so anxious, because you are dysregulated. And I'm like, you're absolutely right. And I've been dysregulated my whole life because I grew up as a child of two children who grew up with parents who were alcoholics, right? I never knew not, hypervigilant, right? And so we try hard to control things and do the right thing because we want to avoid any negative for our kids and all. And when they shared that with me, I was just like, yeah, you're right. And it doesn't make me bad or wrong.
Right. Yes.
It just makes me needing of support and help so that I can become that mom who my kids can trust and feel safe with. And that mom who's resourced enough, feeling connected and trusting and compassionate and clear and calm, so that they can show up however they are and know that they're in a safe container.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's a work in progress. I mean, and it always will be, right? I'm never gonna always have my shit together or ever be resourced enough. But like what's been beautiful over the years, as I get one new tool after another and work with the parts of me, in internal family systems that need support, then more and more I notice more quickly when I'm dysregulated, when I'm responding to them in a way that's not helpful, right? When I'm not trusting, because it still happens, because there's still evidence in their lives that they haven't perfectly figured this whole world out and themselves, right? And I'm like, oh, well, neither have I, right? Part of my brain thinks that they should. And once they're all figured out, then everything's going to be fine and we can just have a good, happy life.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Maybe the whole point of life. And I think I had shared this in one of our comments, like we keep getting broken open.
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
that's the experience of life. We get to,
Yes.
we're going to lose people, they're going to pass away, and we're going to be broken open, and we can
Hmm.
react and freak out and flail and scream, and maybe that's okay, and then come back to ourselves.
Yeah, or we can retreat, right? And
Mm-hmm.
not be in the world anymore, which is
Yeah, yeah,
another
yeah.
um
Strategy.
mal yes, another strategy for dealing with that much pain. And you're
Mm-hmm.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Like the
Mm-hmm.
it's going to keep happening.
Yeah.
Even once you get on the other side of this, there will continue to be tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
That's the
Mm-hmm.
human experience.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And so I guess the gift in all of it is like we get to build those muscles of resilience, like when the hard things come. And then
Yep.
as and we're also we get to be models for our kids of like
Hmm.
when like the thing we
Yes.
didn't want shows up, like
Hmm.
how do
Hmm.
we work through the obstacle, around the obstacle, dance with the obstacle, embrace the obstacle,
Hmm.
and find a new way through, and then they get to see that because both my kids, they're super sensitive, amazing, super sensitive nervous system. And so there's that reactivity that happens, right? And those same strategies, whether it's dissociation or shutdown, or like my son would be more the freak out and push away, reactive.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
if I show up in a new way, then they get to see a new way modeled that they can begin to try on.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And whatever it is that's in you, right? There's something in your unconscious that was causing that freak out. And
Yeah. Yeah.
you made the observation that maybe it's something, in the family history,
Mhm.
but that's
Yeah.
it. We absorb our parents' way of being in the world. And when we do this work, we're actually finally like breaking the pattern. And how
Mhm.
amazing is that?
Yeah.
And it doesn't guarantee, that
Mhm.
our kids aren't going to go down this path or have some other tragedy in their life, but we
Mhm.
are giving them a healthy model of how to be
Mhm.
in the world, how to
Mhm.
deal with life's inevitable tragedies and
Mhm.
heartbreaks and, those things that are going to break your
Yeah.
heart open. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so that's the learning. I often also say my daughter has been my greatest teacher. It's not because she's
Mhm.
telling me
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
all of these things. It's because she has given me the opportunity to learn more about being a human in this world,
Yeah,
and
totally.
and
It's
and
like,
what our capacity is. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, no, exactly. And I kind of always get this picture of like going to a gym, right, and working out. If we never go to a gym and work out, like with resistance, with weight, with, stuff, then we're
Mhm.
not going to get stronger, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
if we never have any difficulties in life, then we never get to build the muscles of resilience. And I think one of the things that, like, looking back, if I'd known 20 years ago what I know now, like, there's aspects of like trying to protect my kids
Mhm.
from difficulties, telling them what and how so that they don't bump into the things that don't feel good. That, like, that idea of if you try to help a butterfly out of a cocoon, it dies
Yes.
because
Yes.
it has to like fight against it in
Yep.
order to get the blood to its wings or however that works with butterflies,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And so as my kids are continuing to make their way forward, there's things I worry about, the things I see that I'm like,
Mhm.
but they need the opportunity to hit up against it.
Mhm. Mhm.
And for me to trust that they're gonna Yeah,
It's
use
interesting.
that.
It's making me think of a piece, when you talk about the butterfly and the chrysalis, and I've often
Mm.
talked to clients about, the chick that needs to hatch, and it's
Yeah.
the same deal. You can't hatch that
Mhm.
chick out of the air. It dies, And I wrote a piece, it's called Liminal, and it's a similar
Mhm.
concept
Mhm.
of
In
turtles,
between.
that have to make it to the water, baby turtles.
Mhm.
And it's a treacherous journey.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's part of their development. It's crucial. They
Yeah.
have to go through that. And
Mhm.
that's not to say that our kids have to go through a trans identity to
Right.
become
Right.
functioning adults.
Yeah.
However, right, like this is there's a lot of that development that can happen for them through this process. And if we attach too tightly to this being maladaptive and having to break them out of it,
Mhm.
fix it,
Mhm. Mhm.
rescue them
Yeah.
from it,
Yeah. Yeah.
then we're kind of doing the same thing. And so
Yeah.
how do we resource them,
Yeah.
right? Which is what you're talking about. How do we
Mhm.
resource them as they're moving through this part of life, and hold it a little more lightly, and not the hypervigilance to every
Mhm.
action,
Mhm.
and what does that communicate to them
Yeah.
about how they're doing
Yeah.
in the world,
Yeah.
because they pick up on it, that
Totally.
energy is there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. And I think yeah, it's a little like there is a book that was recommended. It's kind of a challenging book to read, An Adolescent Psyche, and it's kind of Jungian, but it was
Mm.
reading about like the things that teens go through between, from being a child to being an adult. It is that liminal transition time. And tribal cultures have had these
I was about
identity
to go here.
teaching.
I'm glad that you are doing it.
Yes, yes. And I read that. I was like, oh, yeah. And I remember as a teen growing up in New Jersey being jealous of my friends who had bar and bat mitzvahs because there was
Mm.
this thing of like a transition between child and adult and a recognition of I am not that
Yes,
anymore, right?
that's right.
And our kids
Yes.
are trying to find that. And my
Yep.
son, he was pushing back, I'm not connected to mom as a boy. Like
Mm.
I can't
Mhm.
be like I love that so much. I have to push so hard against the side of the pool to get away.
Yes.
That was part of what
Yes.
he needed to do to individuate, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And our kids are trying in a society that doesn't really have good ritual
Yep.
and ways of them going, and it kind of makes me sad that our culture doesn't have that.
Mhm.
But as I read
Mhm.
about it, I'm like, oh, okay, I can see this in a different light as a way of
Mhm.
trying to work through this shift, right? And as we resource them, and that the other kind of thing that came out of that book and another book I read, Untangled, I think, 7 stages girls have to go through. This was before I
Mm.
knew about any of this trans ID stuff. But
Mm.
still, 7 stages that every girl has to go through from childhood to adulthood. And she said, and I've shared this with my daughter. We laugh about it. She was a psychologist who wrote the book, and she said in her training when she was an intern, she had to read Rorschach tests, this ink blot test
Mhm.
thing.
Mhm. Mhm.
And her professor said, make sure that you pay attention to the age of the person when you're reading the test, because tests that teenagers do, if it was an adult, it would be psychotic. But because it's a teen, it's normal.
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
oh, so our kids aren't supposed to be rational, even
Mhm.
tempered, calm, like fully developed
Yes.
humans. They're not. They're psychotic. Not clinically, right? But just like
Yeah.
there, and I think one of the things that came out of that adolescent psyche book for me too, as well as that identity piece, was the extremes that they're going to, of like extremely dark places, because they need to feel and test that out and see, can I
Mm-hmm.
handle the goth
Mm-hmm.
and emo world, right? My
Mm-hmm.
daughter who's into the
Mm-hmm.
punk and emo and all.
Mm-hmm.
And then they swing to like being super optimistic. I could do anything and be anything I want to be, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's this intensity, and like the highs and lows are not normal, except during this time period where their
Right.
hormones are going crazy and everything
Yes.
else,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And so I think what's helped me also, which I wish I had known when my son was younger, is that when my daughter's in a really dark place, I can say, yeah, that's pretty normal. Like it's normal in this
Mm-hmm.
world. It's normal for the way the world is right now. And, like it's part of the experience. And when we get stuck in it, then we get worried and all, but does that make sense?
Oh, it totally makes sense. And
Yeah,
you might see me, yeah. And it's
yeah,
just
yeah.
because I tried some of that with my daughter and she did not want to hear it. Right.
You tried to share
To
that with her,
tried to
like
normalize
normalize
things,
it.
and
Yeah,
she just,
yeah,
that
yeah,
was not something she wanted to hear. But that's it too,
yeah,
that's where the attunement can come in handy,
totally,
is to
totally.
just pay attention to what
Mhm.
is she able to hear and process and what is she not,
Yeah, yeah,
that's when that attunement can be helpful. Is paying
yeah,
attention
yeah,
to whether your child is able to even receive this information from
yeah.
you right now.
And finding the mode of communication too, right? Like how do
Mm-hmm.
you communicate and connect with them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So with
Mm-hmm.
my daughter, it's music. So if
Mm.
I,
Oh, same. Yes. Yes.
right? So then
Yes.
I listen to her music, and
Yep.
we talk about the goth and the emo and the punk, and like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and she's like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's because I'm a teenager, mom. Like she's self-aware, which is not, I don't think, quite normal as a teenager, but yeah.
Yeah. Though I do, yeah. You mentioned how sensitive your kiddos are, and I think that is a pretty common
Mhm.
thread, at least among the
Yeah,
families that find their way to me, is that
yeah.
sensitivity, that high attunement to the environment,
Mm-hmm.
and so it again makes sense to me that they need this sort of shield, as they're
Yeah,
moving
yeah,
through this very volatile time that you were describing,
yeah, yeah,
because
yeah.
it's a treacherous journey to the
Mhm.
to adulthood, and that they're
Mhm.
on that path, and can we hold the space? And so us being
Yeah,
resourced in a way
yeah,
that we can handle their messy,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
is
yeah,
is pretty key. So, and that
yeah,
takes again that grounded stability that you were talking about
yeah.
in the beginning.
Mhm.
So, yeah, so you mentioned like you went out and resourced yourself. Clearly,
Yeah,
you also did a lot of similar research to what I've done, you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
and that led you to becoming also a life coach. Is that correct?
Hmm.
Like you've gone
Hmm.
through coach training
Yeah, yeah.
all of these things that were kind of born out of these
Hmm.
difficult experiences with your adolescence, which by the way, like you mentioned, had I known it sooner, but
Hmm.
isn't this
Hmm.
the way it goes? This
Yeah,
I
yeah,
kind of think this is what our kids are meant to teach us. And
yeah,
unfortunately,
yeah.
we
Yeah.
don't learn it in time. You know. And
Yeah,
isn't
we
that
can
kind of
only
funny
be,
though? It's again,
yeah,
it's like we wouldn't have learned it had they not
yes,
um shown up in this manner,
yes,
you know?
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a it's the gift of hmm, the gift and the pain, right? Like
Hmm. Hmm.
I would never wish these challenges, either the mental illness that my son went through,
Right.
or what my daughter goes through, on a family. But these, like you talked about, like the dark night of the soul, or like when you hit rock bottom, you land. and then you're like, oh, okay, like the world I thought, all the illusions, all the trying, all the gotta be perfect, like it kind of falls away. And you get to
Mhm.
get in touch with something that's deeper and realer and more true,
Mm,
something that
mhm.
can help you, your kids, and others navigate through, grief and hardship and whatever this world's going to bring, because there's a whole lot of change up in the air all around us. And, we're not in control of that, as I've mentioned many times through our time together. But what we can, hmm, control is not even the great
Thank
word,
you. I don't love
right?
that anymore. I
Yeah,
really,
yeah, but we can't, like there's the
it's
part of us
using the
that wants
information.
to control out there, like and make it,
Mhm, mhm,
but yeah, being able to show up in a resource fluid way to appreciate all the good that is here, right? Because
mhm,
when we're hyper focused on the things that aren't super, that don't feel super good or well with our kids, we miss all the beautiful growth and good things that
mhm,
are happening,
mhm, mhm,
And so when we're out of that reactive, hyper vigilant, and we're resourced and we're calm and we're curious and we're
mhm,
connecting with them, then we're like, oh, I didn't know you were thinking about this or researching that, and not necessarily related to trans ID stuff, but just that their own ways of growing we miss if we're hyper
mhm,
focused on,
mhm. Yep.
one thing, right?
If we're attached to what we think it's supposed to look like,
Yeah, yeah.
yes, then
Mm-hmm.
again, we're communicating, this is broken, must fix it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
instead of, like you said, noticing their own unique ways of moving through this time,
Mm-hmm.
which if they recognize in themselves leads to being resourced, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And when I'm like in that calm resource state, then and I see something good in my daughter, even if I'm looking at like all the things she hasn't done or whatever, all the things I'm worried about, if I see the good and I say, hey, I see this in you, she just
Mm-hmm,
lights up, right? Because that's
mm-hmm,
really
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
mm,
Yep.
being
And
seen.
then wants to be more of that.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
yeah.
And that's what we're
What we
talking
focus
about in the
on
energy.
grows.
It's
Yeah.
like they can't even help themselves. They
Mhm.
will, they basically, they will make your story true. Whatever story you are
Mhm.
holding.
Mhm. Yep.
Mhm. And
Yeah.
so it's
Yeah.
really important to pay attention to the story you have.
Yeah.
What is the
Yeah.
story you're telling yourself about your child?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's
And
what you're going to see when you look at them, and that is what
yep.
they are going to act into.
It's what they're going to see because of the mirror
Mhm.
neurons,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so our greatest work is paying attention to our stories
Mhm.
and recognizing that, like I said,
Yes.
with learning with my son with the OCD, like I learned with myself, like, oh, my stories that I'm like convinced are true may not
Mhm.
actually be true, right? Yeah. And
Mhm.
even if I see evidence, it doesn't mean that it's the only truth that's there.
Yeah.
What else is true?
Yes. Yes. Well, yes, recognizing we are the meaning maker.
Yeah.
That's happening in our
Mhm.
brain. And we
Mhm.
can tweak that,
Mhm.
if we
Yeah.
become conscious of our stories, we can start shifting the story. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
amazing how that impacts the people around us.
Totally. Yeah.
So we are super, I think, lucky to have had you join the community. I
Mm.
honestly, I can't say it enough. Like I am just so impressed with who is being attracted into that community,
Mm.
and
Mhm.
we're delighted to have you in there. I love that that was part of the attraction for you, is that it could be somewhere that you could share some
Yeah.
of these, new skills and insights and,
Yeah.
again, healthy ways of dealing with this with the other moms in the
Mhm.
community. So
Mhm. Yeah.
super glad that you're in there. How has it been for you in there?
I've really loved it. I love the group of women that show up and the things that are shared and how like there's the honesty and vulnerability, but also that paying attention and self-awareness and resourcing, right? Like I hear and I read people talking about like this way of resourcing themselves and sharing that and cheering each other on in, in the ways that we're learning to show up differently and not just for our kids, but also for ourselves, because this is our life, right? And we get to make it beautiful or terrible, based on what we believe about ourselves and about our life, those
Story.
stories, right? And one thing I'm loving, we're in the I have that one little group I'm a part of within the group of the mindfulness-based stress reduction
Yeah.
program, right? Coming out of Harvard and Boston. And I have loved that because that's something that like is great for us in resourcing ourselves to experience more of the beauty and the good in our everyday and pay less attention to the stories that are like clouds that are going to come and go, Think about it like when my kids were toddlers and like potty training was just like a nightmare, and I'm like, and I remember a friend saying to me, well, they're not going to be 20 and like going off to college, in diapers still, right? This too shall pass,
Yes.
And
Yes.
in some way, shape, or form, and like these times that our kids are going through in adolescence, and they're still in the chrysalis, they're still goopy, and
Yes.
maybe not ready to come out and be the butterfly that they are, like they're just
Yes.
starting.
And just to also call back to the conversation I had with Julie Henderson and kind of what I learned in my conversations with her is that we are also in the chrysalis right now,
Mm.
and again, mirroring it's unusual, I think, for us to be in this phase of midlife when our kids are still young and at home. For most of us, we're a little bit older moms,
Yeah, it's true.
but midlife is going to put us
Yes,
back in that chrysalis. We are coming into what's known
totally.
as, in Jungian, they call it the second adulthood.
Yeah.
We are in transition from first
Yep.
adulthood into second adulthood, and that's what this circumstance invites from us, right? Is to, like you said, look under the hood. Use this as context
Yeah.
for what is still triggering you, because if you're being triggered, there's stuff going on in your unconscious that needs to be
Wow.
uh, brought into consciousness, right? We need to shine a light on
Mhm.
it and we need to understand
Yeah.
what's happening so we can
Yeah.
not get stuck in the goo.
Yeah.
Which is not how
I
you want to spend the rest of your life, right? That
Right,
sounds
right.
painful.
This is a really like potent time of that. And as you were sharing that, it reminded me of something an old coach had said once. He said, never waste a good trigger. It's like if it's coming
Yes.
up, right? If it's coming up, it's ready to come up. And basically, the other image he shared, which I really, really love, is that it's like produce in a produce drawer, like our strategies of how we manage to survive to this point in our lives. Like some of that reactivity, some of the fighter in me is what
Mhm,
kept me going through all my health challenges and
mhm,
all our
mhm,
moves and everything else, right? So those aspects of ourselves that we're looking at, we're like, oh, I'd like to change this, or this is not so helpful now. Like it was helpful way back when.
mhm. Oh,
And
it
the
was there, it's
produce,
there for a reason. Yes.
right,
Mhm,
and the
mhm.
produce has expired. It is now no longer helpful. It's spoiling. Let's take it out of the fridge,
I love that. Yep. And
right?
get
So
some
it's not
new
that it was
produce.
right. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It's so true. Yes. And I think that's part of this. And it can go a little unnoticed because we're so swimming in the water of this trans stuff that we don't recognize
Yeah.
that this would be happening anyway, that we would
Yeah.
be discovering that, like you said, those
Mhm.
tools that have worked for us up to this point aren't working
Yeah.
anymore.
And
And it's
that
time to take a
emptiness.
look at them and to cull. Yes. Yeah.
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 Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I love that second adulthood thing because I've definitely been going through it. My husband, we're the same age, and we're like looking at each other like, who are you? Like, who am I? Like, we're different than we were before. We're still not sure, like, and where are we going? And how are we doing this to get, like, I feel like we're dating again because,
Yep. Yep.
like
Well, yeah.
renegotiating relationship, right?
Absolutely. Well, and here's the other thing about that, and this might be a little bit of a bombshell to drop right here at the end of this conversation. But essentially, like if Jungians would say, like that first part of your marriage was all projection anyway.
Mhm.
And now you're actually getting to know your husband. Like, how
Yeah,
trippy
right.
is that? And
Yeah,
I know I
yeah,
experienced that
yeah,
too,
yeah.
Yes.
And
So,
it's a beautiful commitment to be like, okay, like I want to get to know you and
yeah,
and feel
yeah.
safe enough that we're going to be able to be who we are and
Hmm.
figure out how we're going to navigate forward, and
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
yeah, and it I remember I had an experience with my daughter, or I had an experience that made me think, oh, she feels this way, that insecurity, that like I don't know what I'm becoming, all the things, and shared like, hey, we're going through that too, and like,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, so it
yeah.
gives us a bit more compassion.
Yes, it does. Well, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's so important again to just model just being human,
Yeah.
and like you said, letting go of the imperfections. That's not
Yeah.
reality. And you
Mhm.
can, another gift in this, and I said this recently in the comments on the Stoic Mom Project is if this does anything, it shatters that illusion of control, which needs to happen.
Totally, totally. I think, yeah, the greatest gift because then we're actually dealing with reality instead of what we
Yes.
think we're supposed to be able to create.
Yes.
And yeah.
Well, I have sure appreciated this conversation. Again, so grateful to have you in the community. I love that I'll see you on Sunday, hopefully, if that works for you to be at the monthly meeting. I think I'll get this published before then, probably the next day or two. But this is
Yeah.
great. It actually really reinforced, I think, my most recent piece, even about
Mm.
responsibility and
Oh,
mirroring and modeling. And yes,
oh,
so
yeah.
that's great.
Mm.
I appreciate that.
Yep. And we get to keep learning and growing along the way. It's not going to just, okay, now I got it.
We're all in process. This is what it means to be
Yeah.
human. It's this. It's
Yeah.
that we
Yeah.
keep having to get uncomfortable so we can keep learning and
Mhm.
growing. So
Yeah. Well, thank you for everything you bring together, all the people and all of the um, grounding and resourcing, and that's it really, your writings and your putting yourself out there in those ways helped me feel like, oh, I'm not the only one who
mm,
is moving through this in this way, and that
mm.
together we can become more resourced and
Resource.
resource each other and feel less alone in it all.
I'm better, not bitter, right? I love that.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon.
All right, thank you.
You've been listening to Conversations Along the Way, part of the Stoic Mom Project. If you're interested in connecting with other growth-oriented, non-affirming moms, consider joining the SMP Online Community Center. This is a private, vetted community hosted on Mighty Networks and created specifically for moms who share this circumstance. For more information and to express interest in joining, please visit the SMP Community Center tab at stoicmom.substack.com. Thanks for listening, and always remember, humans have amazing capacity for overcoming adversity and healing. And I'm pretty sure you're human.